Call on Government Order of the Day numbers 3 and 4.
Education Amendment Bill number 2, Committee Stage. Gambling Amendment Bill number 2, Committee Stage continued.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Education Amendment Bill number 2 and for further consideration of the Gambling Amendment Bill number 2.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chair.
Members, the House and Committee for consideration of the Education Amendment Bill number 2 and for further consideration of the Gambling Amendment Bill number 2. Members, we turn first to the Education Amendment Bill number 2, and the question is at Part 1 stand part. This is debate on clauses 4 to 39 and schedules 1 to 3.
Mr. Chairman.
I call Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very happy to take a call on the Education Amendment Bill number 2, and one of the first of what I'm sure will be many, and say that we will be wholeheartedly opposing this legislation, and particularly, and I'm intending to go through clause by clause, in fact, and explain why that is. And I want to turn my comments first of all to the sections of the bill that establish the Education Council of Aotearoa New Zealand, or EduCans as it is to be known. And I want to start by talking about the first amendment that I have put forward in my own name, which would ensure that this new regulatory body for the teaching profession could in fact may in fact be able to develop the confidence of the profession by giving them some democratic oversight of that body. As it stands at the moment, the Teachers' Council of New Zealand, which this body replaces, has members who are drawn from the sector, and there is a democratic process for doing so. This new bill removes that entire democratic process and simply allows the Minister to hand-pick the full membership of the board. That is not going to engender the confidence of the teaching profession, and that is why the amendment that I have put forward restores democratic representation to the governing body of EduCans, and I think that's very important if the sector is going to support it. The Minister has indicated that she will be appointing up to or at least 5 registered teachers. It's important to note that the original drafting of the bill only allowed for up to 5 of the 9 members to be registered teachers. The committee has changed that to be at least 5 of the 9 members must be registered teachers. However, they're still going to be hand-picked by the Minister. And I think that that is going to be one of the things that creates resentment within the sector, and that prevents the new EduCans body from achieving the objective it is there to achieve. So if the objective is, as the government have indicated, is to raise the status of the teaching profession, to provide leadership to the profession, and to be an independent voice for teachers, how can the body do that if the teachers themselves don't have any say over who represents them? If it's a representative body, then where else would we say the body is representative if the people who it represents don't actually have any say over who makes it up? It's just a nonsense, and therefore the amendment that I've put forward to restore a democratic process is a very important one. The second thing that I think we need to consider in light of that are some of the new powers that this legislation confers on the new body EduCans. One of the things it will do, and one of the things which I think it's important, and I support the introduction of it, but I think it needs to be jealously safeguarded, is the power for EduCans to conduct what you could call own motion investigations. So at the moment, the existing Teachers' Council can only investigate the conduct of a teacher where they receive a formal complaint. If they become aware in the process of investigating one formal complaint that there is another issue involving another teacher, or even another issue involving the same teacher, they can't investigate that unless someone then subsequently makes an additional complaint. So there's no provision in the existing legislation for them to launch an own motion investigation. This bill changes that, and I welcome that. I think that's important, because we've had a bizarre situation at the moment where in order to investigate some complaints, the director of the Teachers' Council was the complainant, because actually the council would become aware of an issue in the process of investigating something. They wouldn't have the power to launch another investigation into that additional matter, so therefore the director would be the person who made the complaint to the body that was responsible for the oversight of. And I think that that was a nonsense, and therefore this new own motion investigation makes that clear. But there has to be some safeguard about this, because one of the anxieties that we will hear back from the subjects of this legislation, the teaching profession throughout the country, is that if the government are going to have the power to completely handpick who's on this body, and they're giving them the power to conduct investigations onto whatever they want to, at their own instigation, that's an awful lot of power that the minister is going to effectively have. It's actually not going to make this body more independent, it's going to make it less independent, and it's going to result in the profession having less confidence in it. And so I think those two things together, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to give the call to Chris Hipkins, but just before I do, these microphones, it is working.
It's going on.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we're having microphone issues all over the House at the moment, Mr. Chair.
I was told it wasn't working, so my apologies.
That's all right. It seems to be working.
Hipkins,
So thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to continue my comments. I'm very happy to talk louder if that would be desirable to the House. Of course, so to return back to the comments that I was making. To stay on track, the issue, unlike the current government, the issue that we're dealing with here in this legislation is around whether the teaching profession can have confidence in the regulatory body that is going to have oversight of them, given that their lack of direct representation on that body and the increased powers that body is going to have. And I think they can't, and that's one of the reasons that I've put forward the amendment that I have. I want to then turn to some of the additional powers. In addition to the own motion investigations, which I've mentioned, the Education Council is going to have responsibilities for the leadership of the profession, for raising the status of the profession, and many of the submitters, and I want to be clear here that there were 1,032 submissions dealing with this particular part of the bill. So 1,032 submissions dealing with the creation of the Education Council of Aotearoa New Zealand. There were fewer than a dozen of those that actually supported it. So there was overwhelming feedback from the people who are covered by Educans that they don't want it and they don't support it, and that has fallen completely on deaf ears from when it comes to the current government. So having overwhelmingly rejected it, they're still going to be the subject of it, and this body is supposed to raise the status of teaching. Well, there's some interesting aspects to that. The first of which is obviously the profession clearly don't support it. The second is, if it's going to raise the status of the teaching profession, why has the word teaching been banished from the name of the organisation? And that was something that a lot of submitters commented on and said that actually they wanted to see teaching back into the title of the organisation, and I think that's fair. The second, or third, I think I'm up to about three now, the third point that many submitters raised amongst the additional powers or the additional responsibilities the organisation is going to have is around the dissemination of best practice. And the overwhelming feedback was that is not the responsibility of this body. This body is a regulatory body. It's about ensuring that teachers are registered and that there's appropriate professional conduct and so on. This is not a body about sharing a professional best practice, and what that's going to do is result in a transfer of cost from the agencies of the state in the form of Ministry of Education, Education Review Office and so on, onto a body that is paid for through teacher registration fees, and that is unjust, and that is overwhelmingly the feedback from the profession. So I think before the government go ahead and try and impose these additional responsibilities onto Educans, they need to make sure that they are supported by the profession, and I can say from the submissions that certainly isn't the case. So those were some of the concerns that were raised. There were many, many others. Overwhelmingly, the teaching profession were saying that they don't support this legislation. So the question really becomes, how can it discharge its responsibilities effectively if the people who are covered by it don't support it? And the answer to that clearly has to be no. My colleagues are going to talk about the changes to tertiary governance that are covered in this part, and I'll come back to those in a subsequent intervention, I guess, if I get the opportunity to do so. But I want to talk more about, I mentioned that one of the issues around the regulatory nature and the responsibilities of the regulatory body is setting professional standards. The Teachers' Council as it exists at the moment sets a code of ethics, which is aspirational, but it does set minimum standards for what the conduct, I guess, of the teaching profession should be. But it's more aspirational than that. It's more than saying this is not about setting minimum expectations. It's about saying this is what we're striving for, and it's much more than just the minimums. So yes, it clearly establishes minimums by definition, but it actually goes further and says, actually, we want to go further than that. We want to be an aspirational profession. Once upon a time, of course, the national government claimed to be aspirational. They no longer do. And instead, this bill replaces the aspirational code of ethics with a very arbitrary code of conduct, which would be narrower and set minimum expectations for the profession. And overwhelmingly, those who submitted to the Select Committee said they didn't think that was good enough. They actually thought that the teaching profession should be striving for more than just a minimum code of conduct. And I absolutely agree with them. So that is why I have put forward an additional amendment to return the focus to the Code of Ethics, which is an aspirational document, rather than the Code of Conduct, which is around minimum expectations. Finally, in this contribution, I want to talk about the requirement for the Council to audit 10% of teacher registrations. That's going to create a huge bureaucratic burden, which teachers will have to pay for.
I call Catherine Delahunty.